Chapter 13 of Dave Dashaway, Air Champion by Roy Rockwood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Chapter 13, A Remarkable Explanation. The Ariel had found a landing place where some short, crisp grass covered a spot bare of trees and rocks. Hiram brought the Scout to a halt not 20 feet away. He shut off the power, leaped out, and approached Dave. The latter stood by the side of his machine, waiting for the police officer who had run to the edge of the gully.
"Dave, this has been a startler, hasn't it?" exclaimed Hiram.
"You are one of the wisest boys in the world," spoke the young airman. "Without that spark signal, we should never have got a start on your trail."
"Has it done any good after all?"
questioned Hiram.
"My passenger has got into deeper trouble, hasn't he?"
"It looks that way," answered Dave. "We saw him stumble over that ledge yonder."
"Maybe it was a trick," suggested Hiram. "He's a bad one, I can tell you."
"Here comes the policeman. Any trace of him, officer?" The recent passenger of the Ariel looked serious. He held in his hand a dark lantern, the rays of which, the others had noticed, he had been flashing over the edge of the gully. "Got a rope?" he asked.
"I have one in the Scout. Always carry it," volunteered Hiram briskly, and he ran to his machine and returned with the coil in question.
"The fellow won't run any further away from us this time," advised the policeman. "He's lying on a shelf of rock about 12 feet down. Both of you can help me." The boys followed him. They took a look over the edge of the gully as their leader flashed his lantern down. There, plainly visible, was the recent passenger of the Scout. "He's insensible or dead," spoke the officer in a callous, professional tone. "He must have landed head first. We must get him up here. I want a look at those sparklers." The man's word grated harshly on both Dave and Hiram. They proceeded, however, to follow the directions of the officer. The rope was not heavy, but was very strong, being reinforced with strands of flexible wire. It took them nearly 15 minutes to lower the policeman and hoist first the injured man and then the officer to the surface. As the fugitive lay extended, motionless upon the grass, the officer inspected him with the aid of the dark lantern. "None of his limbs seem broken," he reported, "but he's got a terrific crack on his head. I've seen a good many cases of such hurts, and I guess this fellow has run his last race." "Can't we do something for him?" asked Dave solicitously.
"Say," broke in Hiram, "I see the lights of a settlement over to the west there. It can't be more than a mile away."
"You had better reach it then," suggested Dave. "Yes, and get them to send a wagon or an ambulance for this man," added the policeman. Dave helped his assistant get the Scout off the ground, its pilot marking with his eye closely the main points in the landscape. Thus he would be able to pretty accurately direct those who came after the injured man. The minute the officer was satisfied that nothing could be done to add to the comfort or safety of their charge until aid arrived, he proceeded to examine the pockets of his insensible prisoner. The young aeronaut considered this rather a heartless proceeding, but realized that the officer was acting in pursuance of his duty. Twice he went over every pocket and possible secret hiding place in the clothing of the fugitive. He finally arose to his feet with a baffled and angry expression of face. "He's beat us," he growled. "I fancied he was getting away with his booty, but it was getting away from me and my partner that he was after." "But what has become of the diamonds you spoke about?" queried Dave. "I got rid of them to some partner, I suppose, before we finally ran him down," was the explanation. "It's too bad to miss the big reward that we'd have got." Hiram returned in half an hour. He had made a brief and rapid trip. "The sheriff and his men will soon be here with an auto," he reported, and a very few minutes after that the machine in question halted near the spot. A surgeon had accompanied the village officers. He shook his head as he looked over his patient. "He won't live the night out," he announced with professional certainty. "Concussion of the brain, and a very serious case." The city policeman accompanied the auto back to the village. Before he did so, however, he wrote something on a card and handed it to Dave. "If you will take that card and your bill for the clever work you've done to police headquarters, they'll treat you right," he said.
"Queer about those diamonds, isn't it, Dave?" spoke Hiram as they found themselves alone with their machines. "Maybe the man dropped them in running, or they went over into that gully."
"It would be like hunting for a needle in a haystack to try to find them," declared the young airman. Excitement and trying work at the wheel had worn them out considerably, and they were glad when they crept into their beds at headquarters an hour later. Hiram overslept himself. He awoke late the next morning in the room they occupied jointly at the grounds clubhouse to find his chum missing. He hurried his breakfast and was soon at the hangar. As he neared it, he noticed someone seated on a stool inside it. Dave had the aerial outside and was tanking up with juice, as they called the gasoline. "Someone to see you, Hiram," he announced, nodding his head towards the garage.
"Who is it?" asked his mate curiously.
"He didn't give his name, but he's a boy. Says he knows you."
"Is that so?" returned Hiram musingly, and advanced towards the garage.
Then his face expanded in a welcoming, good-natured way. A lad about his own age was seated with his back to the door and seemed to be eagerly inspecting the little Scout and the mechanical accessories belonging to it.
"Why, Bruce Beresford! Hello!" Hiram shouted suddenly.
"Eh? Oh, excuse me. Yes, it's me," answered the visitor, springing up with a nervous start, and his anxious face brightened as Hiram gave his hand a friendly shake. Hiram drew back a step or two, and with apparent admiration looked over in a quizzical way the lad he had so signally befriended in the past.
"Well," he observed, "you're looking more prosperous than when I last saw you."
"Oh, yes," replied Bruce Beresford, his whole face lighting up. "I've had such wonderful luck."
"You look it, and I'm glad," said Hiram.
His friend of the swampy island certainly showed a great improvement, with good shoes on his feet and wearing a neat suit of clothes.
When Hiram had first met him, Bruce had worn a big cap pulled closely down over his ears, clear to the nape of his neck. Just now, too, Hiram observed that his head, back of his cheeks, was well covered up. It gave Bruce a rather uncouth appearance, and the young pilot of the Scout wondered why. "I hope I'm not acting as if I was imposing on you, coming in on you in this way, and so soon," began Bruce. "Didn't I invite you to do just that?" challenged Hiram. "I know, but it looks sort of, well, cheeky, following you up when I owe so much to you as it is." "Don't bother about that," advised Hiram. "Tell me about that luck of yours. I'll be interested." "Well, you know how I got little Lois comfortably settled at the children's home in Benham. Then I started to work. It was surprising how many little odd jobs a fellow can pick up who tries. I was just delighted until the second day of my work, when I happened to see a newspaper from Hillsboro. That is the town where Martin Dawson, the man who abused us so terribly, lives. There, in the paper, was an advertisement offering a reward for a runaway boy." "Meaning yourself, I suppose?" questioned Hiram. "No one else. It scared me, I tell you, because, and the speaker flushed up, and Hiram noticed that he ran his hand over the back of his head in a conscious sort of a way and seemed embarrassed. "Well, because there was a very good description of how I looked," was added in a quick, short breath. "Thought they'd be after you, eh?" asked Hiram. "I knew they would, and that I wasn't safe in that section," proceeded Bruce. "I felt sure that sooner or later someone would suspect or identify me. It wasn't safe for my sister. I didn't know what to do, for what little I had earned wouldn't take us far. Then came my big luck, and the face of the speaker became radiant." "Tell it," directed Hiram, on the edge with curiosity. "Someone had stolen an automobile from the village banker," went on Bruce. "I had heard of it. I had read the posters giving the number and make of the machine, and offering $100 as a reward for its recovery. Just think of it! That very day an invalid lady I had chopped some wood for asked me if I could get her a bunch of water lilies. I made a few inquiries of some boys I met. They directed me to a swamp about 2 miles from the town. I found a fine bed of lilies and was wading out with an armful when down among a nest of reeds, where it had been run by the ride stealers, was the missing automobile." "That was fine," remarked Hiram. "I guess you got back to town on the double quick." "I did for a fact," agreed Bruce. "And inside of 2 hours I had the reward in my pocket. Oh, but I felt rich. I went to the matron of the home and told her my whole story for the first time. She not only thought I had better get Lois to some safer place and further away from Hillshore, but gave me a letter to a relative living on a farm near Chicago. I got some new clothing for my sister and myself, left Lois with a kind-hearted lady who was only too glad to take her in at $2 a week and her help around the house, and hunted down the address you gave me. You see," concluded Bruce longingly, "I wanted advice." "What about?" inquired Hiram. "Well, I've got over $50 to invest. There's a good deal moving around this place. You spoke of a friend, Mr. Dashaway, and I thought—" "Yes, that's my chum, Dave," interrupted Hiram proudly. "The most level-headed fellow who ever lived. Dave!" Hiram called his chum, and there was an introduction. An explanation followed. The pilot of the Ariel soon had a knowledge of all the circumstances of the case. He and Hiram had seated themselves on a bench opposite their guest. It was warm weather, and both threw off their caps. Bruce hesitated and then followed their example, but in an awkward and confused way. "Why!" exclaimed Hiram with a start, as he noticed that under his cap their visitor wore a close-fitting skull cap. "What's that for?" Bruce Beresford fidgeted. He seemed at a loss for an explanation. Then he scanned the friendly face of Dave and the good-natured one of his assistant. "Well, it's my ears," he said slowly, evidently embarrassed. "Your ears? What about them?" asked Dave curiously. "They've been cut," explained the orphan, "and they're not healed yet. I keep them covered to keep out the germs the doctor said were floating in the air. But they're getting better now." He took off the skull cap and showed where both ears presented a red surface. "How in the world did that happen?" asked Hiram. "Have you been playing football?" End of chapter 13.